G'day viewers, how are you? I hope the week has treated you well. We've made it to the end of another week, which is always something to celebrate. Now, usually at the end of the week or on the weekend, I'll do a Totally Fucked Up Friday or Totally Fucked Up Weekend edition where I talk about and shout about news of the week. And that's kind of what I'm doing today, but I wanted to do something a little different. And then I thought, well, while I'm in the phase of doing something different, I haven't shot a video outdoors in ages, so I provide some tiny bit of evidence that I am not, in fact, a vampire, and I go out in sunlight. As a very nice day. It's just my version of a perfect day. It's low 20s Celsius, really blue sky, light breeze. Just about. I don't like it when it gets hotter. I don't like it when it's cooler. I don't like it when it's windier. This is just about right. Low humidity as well. Just thought I'd give you a weather report at the start. But there's a topic I wanted to talk about because it's in the news a lot if you are a political tragic like me and you're enthralled by the weirdness of the process of selecting candidates to run for US president. The democratic process is really, that is the process of the Democratic Party as opposed to the small d democratic process, although I suppose it's that as well. That's a really long-winded way of saying the Democratic primaries and caucuses are underway. Early front-runner, slightly surprising. Certainly if you went back in time, you'd be surprised that the front-runner is Bernie Sanders, the only candidate who could, by any stretch of the imagination, be regarded as slightly radical left. Certainly in American terms, the rest of the world, he's just a very mainstream candidate with some progressive policies. And you've got Elizabeth Warren, who you could regard as being quite progressive on a number of her policies. The rest of them are either very, very centrist by world standards or leaning more than a tad towards the conservative side, particularly fiscally, and in a lot of cases on social policies as well. But that's not really what I want to talk about, the candidates themselves. I want to talk about reactions I see from people online because, and I don't recommend living your life like I do, really getting into this stuff online. I honestly think it's probably bad for my mental health and getting too into these fights and whatnot. I don't reckon it's great, but as I said, I'm a bit of a political tragic, so I'm quite into it. Now, up front, of course, great big disclaimer, I am not, in fact, an American. So therefore, it's quite reasonable to say my opinions on what's happening there are quite worthless. But I am a person who lives on this planet, and no political process has more effect on the world than the American political process has, both because of economic reasons and also that tendency to start wars all over the world, send troops all over the world, even if they're not declaring wars, and destabilizing and overthrowing governments they don't like and causing coups, including in Australia, November 11th, 1975. So that's the main reason the American process fascinates me, because it has a big effect. Arguably, in a lot of ways, more effect than, in fact, my own government here in Australia does. But again, not talking about big picture politics, small picture and what I see people doing. And I think a lot of people have trouble wrapping their head around the fact a lot of provocative people on the internet are starting from a position of bad faith, and so they're not worth wasting time on, because you literally cannot get anywhere with them because all their actions are in bad faith. Now, I am obviously incredibly provocative in almost everything I do, and I'm deliberately provocative. I would say I don't argue in bad faith, though. I don't put forward things I don't believe. I don't say I don't do things just to cause shit. And halfway through that, going through my head, my mouth started and my brain went, no, you actually do that. And I do. If I think someone is a joke, if I think someone is just not worth worrying about. If I think they're beneath contempt, I will just go to wind them up. Look at my back catalogue of videos that have shut the fuck up somewhere in the title, where I single out things like climate change deniers and other people who aren't worth wasting time on when I'm just having a go at them. But what I see in a lot of things, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or whatever, people deliberately trying to pick fights. Now, I've made it clear, in live streams and other videos of the candidates for US president, I have ended up favouring Bernie Sanders. For quite a while, I was pro Elizabeth Warren. I had doubts about Sanders. Then what swung it was really Warren saying a lot of pro-capitalist things, like, I'm not trying to upset the apple cart, I'm a capitalist. And she seemed too corporatist. And while I don't think she'd be a bad president, I think on the great measuring scale, she'd almost definitely be a good president. It's just, it would be more of the same. She would be a good president in the mold that Obama was a good president, but nothing significantly changed in that period. And the more I looked at Sanders' policies, I didn't even support him against Clinton, although in retrospect I think I was wrong. But Sanders has policies aimed at genuine systemic change, and he is the only one who does. And I honestly have no idea if they'd work, if there'd be significant improvements in people's lives, but he is definitely the only one who's even offering the possibility, and that's why I've ended up supporting him. Now, being online, supporting Sanders, always see the term Bernie bro thrown around. And what I will say, and I think this was true much more in the Clinton campaign than it is now, but the Bernie bro concept is actually based in reality. Look, if you are mercifully out of these things and you're not even sure what that means, Bernie bros is the idea Bernie Sanders attracts a particular aggressive, argumentative sort of male supporter who is very angry, very argumentative, launches very personal attacks on anyone they perceive as disagreeing with them, particularly someone supporting a female candidate, as in Clinton previously or Warren this time, and they're particularly vitriolic towards women online. This is absolutely, genuinely a real thing that happened, that has happened, that continues to happen. I think it's been blown out of proportion, particularly by the media, who have no right to call anyone a bloody bully. But I don't really have any time for a Sanders supporter who wants to assert the phenomenon doesn't exist at all, because there is something about the Sanders campaign, the radical nature of it, the shaking up the system nature of it, that among an incredibly broad cross-section of people who support it, it does appeal to a particular sort of angry young white man who wants to shake things up and get in people's faces and wants something to believe in and wants something to attack, I guess, something to react against. And so, there is a certain sort of Sanders supporter that when they drink the Sanders Kool-Aid, they will be really vicious to anyone who does not. And I'm going to make it really clear here, disagreeing with someone who doesn't support Sanders doesn't make you a Bernie bro. Actually, thinking someone who supports another candidate is a dickhead doesn't make you a Bernie bro. And like I said, I do think it's a minority. I think it's a small minority of his supporters who fit that mold, but they're real. And I do get pissed off at Sanders supporters who assert there's no truth in it at all, because I've seen it. And I get pretty pissed off at people who want to deny other people's lived experiences. they say, Bernie bros aren't real. Someone says, well, all I did was say Elizabeth Warren is better than Bernie Sanders for this reason, and on Twitter, and then my mentions were full of these psychotically angry attacks, very personal, very violent, very threatening. And they go, that didn't happen. You go, well, fuck off. It happens. I see it all the time. So don't deny someone's actual lived experience. That makes you a jerk, quite honestly. And I've got to be honest, when I see guys online saying the Bernie bro thing doesn't happen at all, women who say they're attacked for supporting Warren or anyone else are lying, I assume they actually are the Bernie bro archetypes, because to absolutely ignore reality is ridiculous. Now, the flip side of that is people, I'm in a public park, in case you can't tell. So occasionally someone's going to go along behind me. I'm just going to ignore them. I have no problems with talking in public. So the flip side of the Bernie bro thing is the people who... I'm trying to think of the right word. Do they exaggerate? Do they lie? They act in bad faith? All of those things. And of course, from the outside, it's impossible in most cases to know who's relating their genuine experience and who is just trying to vilify Sanders by vilifying his supporters. Sometimes it's obvious. I saw some utterly absurd stuff on Twitter because everyone's saying like, oh, and jumping around a bit, but Sanders did explicitly say he 100% disavows anyone who behaves like a stereotypical Bernie bro. He absolutely rejects them from his campaign. He acknowledged it happens. He said, when there's millions of people actively involved in the campaign, you can't control everyone. You can't stop them from doing stupid things, which is a simple fact of life. But he did explicitly say it's shitty behaviour and I reject it completely. There honestly isn't a lot more he can do than that, although I'm sure the comments are now going to fill with people who disagree with me on that, which is fine. But I think a lot of the people who have got their back up about the real issue of the Bernie bros have been somewhat pushed over to a point where their reactions aren't completely rational. Like I see people that I'm pretty familiar with online, intelligent people and politically astute people making statements, and I'm going, really? You honestly think that? And I'm stunned. And as Sanders has pointed out, once this concept of the Bernie bro started to become a mainstream talking point, anyone who wanted to sort of foment unrest, anyone who wanted to exacerbate divisions, anyone who wanted to try and put the Sanders campaign in a bad light, all they had to do was go online, say they were a Sanders supporter, and act obnoxious and abusive. And of course, that's happening non-stop. And I've seen people that by all appearances are intelligent and quite politically astute who don't seem to be able to wrap their head around that concept, that we've kind of gone through the looking glass, that yes, the Bernie bro thing was real, there was definitely Sanders supporters who were like that, but now it's become weaponized, that people who either are against Sanders specifically or just want to screw things up for Democrats generally go online, say they're Sanders supporters, act incredibly abusive and obnoxious, and then people hold up that behaviour as, see, the Bernie bros, they're terrible. And I mean, how do you solve that when anonymous people act in bad faith? And it can be very, I was going to say impossible, but it's only difficult. I mean, if somebody has just started up like a new Twitter account and has no followers or almost no followers, and all they do is post argumentative and abusive things, I think you can count them as a troll. I mean, it was interesting this week that some American intelligence agencies apparently made a formal statement that, yeah, they have pretty conclusive evidence that Putin has orchestrated direct interference in this election process again, and his preferred outcome is Trump wins again. But that's a rabbit hole you can fall down really badly. To go, it's all Russian trolls. I mean, no, a huge chunk of them are just trolls. When you try and explain it to people and say, no, as the famous line about the Joker, some men just want to watch the world burn. There is a huge community of trolls who just think it's funny to upset people. And when you publicly announce, here's the thing that upsets me, Sanders supporters who are abusive, particularly towards women candidates or women supporters of any candidate, that's very upsetting and that's awful. You've just told them how to get their jollies. Go online, say there are Sanders supporters, be abusive, particularly towards women. And when I see people who don't seem to be able to understand, you can't put weight on particularly anonymous accounts acting like jerks, because trolls, like, whether they're supporting a different Democratic candidate, whether they're actually Trump supporters just trying to make all Democrats look bad and be pissed off, or whether they're just trolls who just love chaos, that's what they're doing. They're trolling. Virtually the only thing you can do in these cases, don't engage. When someone does something to wind you up, there's almost no value in getting it. If they start with abuse, there's almost no value in getting an argument with them. I'm a huge believer in block and ignore and move on. But occasionally you see weird shit from, I've seen journalists on Twitter saying the stupidest crap. And it goes from, like, they've so latched onto Sanders supporters are evil, Sanders has to disavow them. And like I said, anonymous accounts, that's impossible. But let's say like some high profile, public, known Sanders supporters, like the people who do the Chapo Trap House podcast. If you've never listened to it, you might enjoy it. I think it's pretty funny most of the time. They do say, not so much on the podcast, but in their private sort of social media, they regularly say stuff I disagree with. Like, they seem to have a very poor idea of the concept of and importance of intersectional politics, for a start. But their class politics, I'm completely on board with. And of course, their shtick is, well, I don't know if they called themselves that or someone else called them that and they adopted it. They're the dirtbag left. They're not respectable. They're obnoxious and rude and loud. And I have to admit, I'm juvenile and find a lot of that funny. But I was watching Twitter accounts trying to criticize them when the most recent Democratic debate was going on, because they were posting crass things on their Twitter feeds, and while doing a live stream, they were saying crass things. And I was seeing these people who supposedly intelligent, responsible, saying, oh, is Sanders going to disavow this filth? And then they're quote tweeting stuff that's not even abusive. It's not the Bernie bro abusive stuff. It's crass. It's in poor taste because that's their line in humour. But it's like they're not being misogynist. They're not being abusive. They're just being crass. And the idea of you have to disavow comedians who are crass when crass is their whole shtick is absolutely surreal. So I guess this long ramble could be summed up in if you're actively engaging in discourse while this ridiculously drawn out process is going on, look after your mental health. Yes, the Bernie bro thing was based in reality. Yes, there are real, genuine Sanders supporters who are fucking pieces of shit. Ignore them. Block them. Don't overreact. And for God's sake, just always remember there are a huge number of people whose primary goal is to sow chaos. You know, whether you want to really go down the rabbit hole of, oh, Putin and the Russian trolls, and blah, 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 or, you know, just obnoxious fucking people who want to spread discord, who want chaos to reign. don't get sucked in. Do your best not to get sucked into it. I'm saying that fully well. Every now and then I get sucked into it. Someone just sets me off and I'm like, are you for fucking real? In fact, the last one I did it to is someone who I reckon probably fits the fucking frame of a Bernie bro. Someone I don't know in real life, but I'd been Facebook friends with on Facebook friends on Facebook. Where else are you going to be Facebook friends? 4 years, and it was largely because of a shared political view. And they went on this huge spray about, oh, the Bernie bro thing's not real. And I said, come on, you've got to admit there's a basis for that stereotype. It's not all or even a significant minority. It's a small minority, but it's real. Saying it's not real is horseshit. And they just went off, and at a certain point I just thought, I think the reason you don't see the behaviour is you're doing it. And I ended up doing the unfriend and block thing, because it's just like, what the fuck is wrong with you? It's a really basic thing. Don't be a dickhead. And, it's like they're screaming, I'm not a dickhead, while strangling a kitten. And I'm like, wow, okay, no, I actually think you are one of the ones that the stereotype fits, and I don't want anything to do with that. But yeah, certainly on Twitter, which is just a fucking cesspool, don't engage with the people who do things to inflame you. Just block, forget about them, because all they are doing is trying to cause shit, and I think your life's probably worth more than that. So it's just going to get worse and weirder as it goes on. And I'm honestly probably going to enjoy the weird and fucked up nature of what, the next 6 months is going to be. And so I'm not going to stop talking about it. But look after your mental health, because too much diving too deep into this sort of stuff will really fuck you up. And you don't want that. You got to look after yourself, because I want you to keep coming around. Don't get burnt out by this idiocy. Step away from it from time to time, because you're worth more than internet trolls. And I'll leave it there. Look after yourselves. I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.